Now returning to US politics, and as we heard earlier, the US Vice President has rejected a push to remove Donald Trump early from office as Democrats shift their focus towards an impeachment vote. Now, to talk all things US politics, I'm joined by CEO of the United States Studies Centre, Professor Simon Jackman. Good afternoon to you, Professor.
Afternoon.
Professor, when we last spoke, it was last week in the wake of the Capitol Hill riots. What is your take on what has played out since then? It feels like a long time, but it's only been 6 days.
Yeah, look, a couple of things. First of all, I think as the investigation into the event of last week goes on, I think people are coming to an understanding of just how perilous this was for members of Congress. In particular, we're talking about meters and seconds or maybe minutes separating some of the more violent protesters and from members of Congress. And I think that is leading to some of this sort of increasingly bipartisan sort of outrage about what occurred, and in turn fueling some of this increasing Republican appetite for considering moving against President Trump with this impeachment vote about to take place on the floor of the House of Representatives probably as soon as tomorrow. So that's one thing. And the other thing is the news that there may be more trouble afoot, and this is just enormously alarming. The security measures that have been taken around the US Capitol ahead of time are one thing, but the sheer magnitude of the security challenge that officials face, not just in Washington, but across the United States, if the online chatter is to be believed, and it probably should be believed given what happened last week. And so those are the two big things that sort of have jumped out at me in the last little while, but perhaps in real time, just watching, it's a very dynamic situation in Washington at the moment, where Republicans one by one are landing on this question of whether to continue to support President Trump in these dying days of his presidency, or perhaps like several high-profile Republicans have already said that they would support impeachment. I think this is a very, very hard choice looming for a lot of House and then perhaps secondarily Senate Republicans.
As I said in the opener, Mike Pence, he has written a letter to the House Speaker and said that all members of Congress need to, quote, lower the temperature and unite our country ahead of the inauguration of Joe Biden. Does he have a point? Because a lot can happen in the next 7 days.
Yeah, look, he does have a point, a call for unity. But I think it's hard to understate the anger among members of Congress that you can draw a line between remarks by some of them, some House Republicans who spoke at that rally that the president hosted further down the mall from Capitol Hill. The way you can draw a line between the rhetoric of the president through to that, through the election period, through to that rally, the way that the Stop the Steal campaign sort of blossomed into something much larger and an assault on the Capitol itself that put people's lives in danger, and the international embarrassment for the United States on top of it all. The hostility, the idea that we're just going to unify, quote unquote, now and not take an action. And what has the House got available to it? Well, the ultimate sanction for an act of this gravity is impeachment. So I understand why we'd all like to calm everything down, and I hope that does happen. On the other hand, I also understand if you're an institutionalist, like many Republicans would describe themselves are, this was an attack on the institutions of American democracy like none we've seen in centuries. And so I understand the argument that many House Democrats feel they have no other choice but to go down this route.
Well, we heard from Donald Trump today. He said the 25th Amendment is of zero risk to me, but will come back to haunt Joe Biden and the Biden administration. And then he went on to say, as the expression goes, be careful what you wish for. Well, I mean, it doesn't really end, does it?
No. And look, what he's alluding to there in a very backhanded kind of way is that Joe Biden is no spring chicken himself, and that that maybe there might come a time where there might be questions asked about his mental capacity at some point in his presidency, and it's a not too veiled allusion to that. Now, as it transpires, Pence has ruled out the 25th being on the table at all. We're past that now, and all eyes, I think, are on the floor of the House of Representatives, like I said, in the next 24 hours or so. And the real question being, how many Republicans are going to join the Democrats in a historic second impeachment of Donald Trump?
What is the biggest concern, the biggest threat in the next week ahead of the inauguration?
Oh, I think the security issue. I think the security issue. It's interesting. I was talking to a colleague about this earlier today, that Trump himself, his behavior might be a little muzzled. There was one thought that Trump would lash out and do something damaging using his powers as commander-in-chief. I think I always put lower probability on that from the get-go.
He's smarter than that.
But the point was being that if he's impeached with the threat of conviction in the Senate, that actually puts Donald Trump on a bit of a leash for the remaining 6 days of his presidency. And I get the argument, but far and away, I think the biggest concern I have looking at the United States right now is just clearly the security officials are spooked. The fences they've erected around the Capitol, the sheer number of National Guard personnel that are being deployed around Washington. The reports go from 10,000 now up to 15,000 is what I'm reading. I think it's just what can transpire. And indeed, do the protesters feel emboldened by what happened on Wednesday? Are they going to learn their lessons? You don't show up with your face in clear view. You show up dressed for combat, wearing masks and some of that paramilitary kit that some of them were wearing. Does, if anything, it prompt an escalation and a redoubling of the efforts of the insurrectionists, and that their efforts won't just be confined to Washington, D.C., which will be heavily guarded on the day, but what might happen in other parts of the country? And moreover, does it die down? Is with the inauguration of Biden, is that the end of it? Or does the oxygen in this stay there, perhaps especially if the American Congress is still considering actions to sanction or punish Donald Trump even after he stops being president?
Terrifying questions, and just a fascinating time in the United States. We do have to leave it there. Professor Simon Jackman, thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Thank you.